Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our class on Isaiah tonight. We're getting right down to the end of the book, and we're going to cover we'll cover three chapters tonight, and then there'll be 2 chapters next week and 2 chapters the following week, and that'll bring us to the end of Isaiah. But tonight we're going to begin with chapter 60, the glorified Zion. And of course, we're in that section of the book of Isaiah that's a lot of fun because we're really getting to that point in the book that there's this robust, effusive almost excitement being talked about the status of Israel in the millennial kingdom. And we're going to get into some of that detail here tonight. It's quite something to try to grasp the blessings of the nation of Israel that is coming for them in the kingdom to come. So beginning here in verses 1 through 7, let's just take a look here what it says here. Verse 1 says, "Arise, shine, for your light has come. The glory of the Lord has risen upon you." Speaking of Israel, "For behold, darkness will cover the earth, and deep darkness the peoples. But the Lord will rise upon you, and his glory will appear upon you. Nations will come to your light, and kings to the brightness of your rising. Lift up your eyes round about and see. They all gather together. They come to you. Your sons will come from afar, and your daughters will be carried in the arms. There you will see and be radiant, and your heart will thrill and rejoice, because the abundance of the sea will be turned to you. The wealth of the nations will come to you. A multitude of camels will cover you, the young camels of Midian and Ephah. All those from Sheba will come, and they will bring gold and frankincense, and will bear good news of the praises of the Lord. All the flocks of Kedar will be gathered together to you. The rams of Nebaioth will minister to you. They will go up with acceptance on my altar, and shall glorify my glorious house." So here is an introductory statement in verse 1 and 2 here about the contrasting features between Israel and the rest of the world. This is clearly messianic or millennial kingdom language. The entirety of what we're talking about here, virtually the entirety of what we're going to talk about for the remaining chapters of this book, have to do with how God is going to ultimately bless Israel. So there's this light versus darkness motif. God speaks of Israel as being the light, and the rest of the world still groping in darkness. And so obviously the darkness that we're talking about here, the lightness that we're talking about here is the light of God being shined onto his nation Israel. And it says here in verse 3 that kings and nations will come to your light. And so it seems as though there's going to be a real attractiveness to Israel. It will have a certain charisma to it, that the whole world will be gravitating to it. They will recognize the extreme blessing that this one nation is experiencing in the millennial kingdom over and above all the other nations. And it will be the place where the ones will go to experience the presence of God there in that particular country, Israel. And so this idea of come to your light, I think, implies a desire to be instructed and to learn, for the knowledge of God will come through the Israelites. They will be the source of knowledge. And of course, Jesus himself will be resident in Jerusalem, for goodness sakes. Think about it. If you want to have plan a trip somewhere to think to go to Israel and to actually come face to face with Jesus in his earthly ministry, his earthly kingship. I mean, that would be something to see. And so that's kind of what's being painted here. And so in verse 4, as the nation of Israel begins its kingdom, one feature must be completed: the total regathering of all the Jewish people from around the world. So this is another section here. We've seen other sections of the book of Isaiah speaking of the regathering of the Jews from all the points of the earth coming back to Israel. So my perception of it is that in the millennial kingdom, if you're Jewish, you're living in Israel. You're not going to be living in New York City anymore, or in Brazil, or Argentina, or who knows where. You're not going to be living those places. I think the scriptures are trying to tell us that they're all going to be back in Israel, the nation of Israel, at this time. We saw this being discussed in Isaiah 14, verse 2. The nation will bring the Israelites back to their land. And then in chapter 49 of Isaiah, this is what the sovereign Lord says: "Look, I will raise my hand to the nations. I will raise my signal flag to the peoples. They will bring your sons in their arms and carry your daughters on their shoulders." So it looks like we have the whole world being engaged and commissioned to bring the Israelites, assisting to bring them back to their rightful home. And it seems as though the people themselves, the Jewish people themselves, will be happily to be very happy to bring them, to be brought back to their homeland. It's not like they're coming back resisting. Oh, gee, do I have to go back? I don't think that's the case. And so, verse 7, I'll just kind of skip by 5 and 6. But basically in 7, you have a reference to the millennial temple, the glorious house, as it's stated here, as if you were not as impressed enough about Israel itself, but you think about the glorious vision of seeing this new newly built and implanted millennial kingdom temple that's going to be on a high hill north of Jerusalem. It's going to be something to see. And I think this will be even more beautiful and glorious than Herod's temple, because remember how impressed the disciples were with Herod's temple. I don't think this Herod's temple will compare to this one. And so you're starting to get a real sense of the glories of what's going to take place in that little land. So let's look at 8 through 14. Who are these who fly like a cloud and like the doves to their lattices? Surely the coastlands will wait for me, and the ships of Tarshish will come first to bring your sons from afar, their silver and their gold with them, for the name of the Lord your God and for the Holy One of Israel, because he has glorified you. Foreigners will build up your walls, and their kings will minister to you. For in my wrath I struck you, and in my favor I have compassion on you. Your gates will be open continually. They will not be closed day or night, so that men may bring to you the wealth of the nations, with their kings led in procession. For the nation and the kingdom which will not serve you will perish, and the nations will be utterly ruined. The glory of Lebanon will come to you, the juniper, the box tree, and the cypress together, to beautify the place of my sanctuary, and I shall make the place of my feet glorious. The sons of those who afflicted you will come bowing to you, and all those who despised you will bow themselves at their soles of your feet, and they will call you the city of the Lord, the Zion of the Holy One of Israel. So here in verses 8 and 9, God turns his attention to the seas. And what does he see? Well, he looks for a bit and he sees little clouds on the ocean on the distance, and then it looks like doves flocking together on their way home. But wait, look, these are ships coming towards the coast. And what is their cargo? It is all the Israelites coming home from distant lands. And they are coming back, not destitute, but with wealth with them. All this because of God's grace towards them. And of course, in verse 10, we see that those Gentiles who find their way into the promised land will support the Jews in the rebuilding of the nation. They will be the laborers. Even their most senior person, even a king, will have a position of a servant in his relationship to the Israelites. Despite God's prior wrath and discipline, of course, he now has favor on his people, and only upon the magnificent work of the Redeemer. And in verse 11, here is the image, intensifying what he has already stated. There is no obstacle in the way of these Gentile nations coming to Israel. So there's going to be an open door policy. It's just like you get this idea of this, just a flood of the nations and the leaders of the nations coming through to Israel to assist in the building up of that nation, to serve the Jewish people in whatever role they are assigned, to help this nation really prosper and flourish. And it's going to be the glories of the entire world. Israel will be. It's going to be something to see.
Tom, it reminds me of, where they got the picture from in the movie with Charlton Heston and Moses.
The Ten Commandments.
Yeah, and at that scene where all of, he comes in, Moses does, after some sort of accomplishment, but they have this procession of nations coming in for Pharaoh and showing all the wealth of that nation. Looks like this, and they're all spreading out their gifts, and it just reminds me of that.
Yeah, that's an interesting connection, that scene from that movie, the Ten Commandments, and how Pharaoh and the nations were coming to him with their wealth and with their gifts and with their pomp and circumstance. So there's kind of a similar situation here. And then in verse 13, you have this idea of the Lebanese will be the landscapers around the temple area. So there's this whole beautification project going to take place, and there's going to be beautiful landscape. It'll be really interesting to see what kind of garden design they come up with. I hope it's more formal and not the crazy jungle gardens that we see that's so popular today. But there's going to be nothing left to unattended in terms of beautification and glorification of this land. Let's see. In verse 14, the sons of those who afflicted you will become bowing down to you. And I think about the sons of Ishmael and Esau, in other words, the Arabs. And all those who despise you will bow themselves at the soles of your feet. What a contrast to today's world this will be. And it won't be that they're submitting in some sort of grudging requirement because they're conquered and they're defeated. I think it's more of just the marvel of God and seeing the marvel of what he's done with the Israelites. I think they're going to come with great interest and not any sense of envy or hostility. I wrote on here, there's going to be an Israel first policy. We got America first. This is going to be the real Israel first policy. Here we have verses 15 through 22. Whereas you have been forsaken and hated, with no one passing through, I will make you an everlasting pride, a joy from generation to generation. You will also suck the milk of the nations and suck the breast of kings. Then you will know that I, the Lord, am your Savior and your Redeemer, the mighty one of Jacob. Instead of bronze, I will bring gold. Instead of iron, I will bring silver. Instead of wood, bronze. Instead of stones, iron. And I will make peace. I will make peace your administrators, and righteousness your overseers. Violence will not be heard again in your land, nor devastation or destruction within your borders. But you will call your walls salvation and your gates praise. No longer will you have the sun for light of day, nor the brightness will the moon give you light. But you will have the Lord for an everlasting light, and your God for your glory. Your sun will no longer set, and your moon wane, for you have the Lord for an everlasting light, and the days of your mourning will be over. Then all your people will be righteous. They will possess the land forever, the branch of my planting, the work of my hands, that I may be glorified. The smallest one will become a clan, and the least one a mighty nation, and I, the Lord, will hasten it in its time. More grand and glorious language about the millennial kingdom for Israel. And I think that in verses 15 and 16, first of all, God is not finished expressing his allegiance to Israel and his outright demand that his people Israel receive honor and glory and that the world has always denied them. And I cannot fathom when you read these kinds of chapters. It's not just an isolated verse here. We're talking about chapter after chapter about the glories of the nation of Israel at some point in history, that we cannot come to grips with the idea that there's going to be an earthly millennial kingdom with Jesus Christ ruling from Jerusalem. Because that's exactly what we're seeing here. How can people miss this? It just boggles my mind. Well, I know that the way they look at the Bible is that they think, and Luther was really big on this, by the way. They look at that New Testament and all the glorious revelation that God advanced our understanding of who God is and the development of the Trinitarian understanding of who God is. That with such a robust revelation of the New Testament, that they think that they have to go back and look at the Old Testament anew and look at it in a way that is interpreted by what has happened with Christ in the new. In other words, they're looking at what Christ has accomplished in his first coming as though that was all there is for him to do, and that everything has to be interpreted in light of the church and what God has blessed the church with. So when they come to chapters like this, and Luther would be in this category, you have to look for Christ in this. Well, he is in here. We've talked about the Redeemer is the basis of all of this blessing. So it's not that we don't see there isn't any reference to it here, but the basic idea is that the church is the end goal of God. And if the church is the end goal of God, then all these things that are being spoken of about the glories of the nation of Israel and the land and all of the fruitfulness of it and all of the things we're talking about have to be re-understood in a different way and applied to the church, because the church is the end of all the of human history. There's nothing beyond that. And if you want to look at it that way, then yeah, you can kind of see why they have to really reinterpret and see these things in a sort of a spiritualized way so that they can apply it to the church. But we, on the other hand, do not go about Bible interpretation in that manner. We look at the Old Testament standing on its own. It doesn't need the New Testament to reinterpret things. We have the skill and the hermeneutic that we can interpret the Old Testament and understand it in light of what the Jews thought it meant to them when they received these revelations back in those centuries. And clearly, the Jews are reading this prophecy of Isaiah, understanding it in an earthly sense. So it's quite an indictment of God to say that he did not intend them to understand it that way. Because as the church comes on the scene many centuries later, and Christ has been incarnated now, and we have all of the New Testament revelation, that somehow that understanding that the Jews originally had was erroneous. And it was deceptive. I think this would be very deceptive to them to think that, we didn't mean it. God saying to them, I didn't really mean it in the most crass and earthly way. This was done to try to give you an understanding of what goes on in the hearts of men when the new covenant comes and you have this righteous understanding of life that is the life that's been imparted by the Holy Spirit. That's what that's what God's talking about here? Is that the way it should be understood? And the Jews, all these centuries, had a misunderstanding of it? When I'm looking at this, and I would be in the category that I would misunderstand this. I wouldn't understand that this isn't literal, that he isn't talking about a grand and glorious future, a moment when the nation of Israel is the head of the nations, and they're in this most unbelievably prosperous situation. How am I supposed to understand that there's something spiritual about this, but not literal? It's just beyond my comprehension how it can go to be thought of in that way. Look at verse 18, the contrast, things that are absent from Israel. No violence, no devastation, no destruction. And I think that's in there because Jerusalem has been destroyed more than any other city in history. More times than most scholars can count. But look at it, even extends to the eternal state. Look at verses 19 and 20, for goodness sakes. This I thought for a minute I was reading Revelation chapter 21. Is this Revelation, the eternal state of Revelation 21, or is this Isaiah? So even in the eternal state, there's going to be a distinction and a particular blessing going forth to the nation of Israel, even in the eternal state. And I know that because it's confirmed by the fact that the New Jerusalem that's coming down to house the eternal state, it has 12 gates. There's going to be 4 or 3 on each side, and each gate is going to be named after one of the tribes of Israel in the eternal state. And here you have Isaiah speaking of it, right? Speaking of the eternal state right here. So I don't know what you do with that.
It's called New Jerusalem too.
Yeah. Oops. The New Jerusalem. So there's, obviously, I could spend time and talk to you about Revelation, but I won't do that because you will have to come to my sermons to get that part of it. So let's take a look at chapter 61, the exaltation of the afflicted. This particular chapter continues with this section about the blessings to Israel that still await fulfillment. And I don't know if I can emphasize this point strongly enough, but the basis of all the future blessings on the nation of Israel reside in the person and work of Jesus Christ. He is the foundation for this glorious future time. And so, just want to keep that in the back of our minds here. Exaltation of the afflicted. Let's look at verses 1 through 3. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because the Lord has anointed me to bring good news to the afflicted. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to captives and freedom to prisoners, to proclaim the favorable day of the Lord and the day of vengeance of our God, to comfort all who mourn, to grant those who mourn in Zion, giving them a garland instead of ashes, oil of gladness instead of mourning, the mantle of praise instead of a spirit of fainting. So they will be called oaks of righteousness, the planting of the Lord, that he may be glorified. So the question may be asked in verse 1, and I think it's a legitimate question. Who is the me referred to in these verses? Is this Isaiah speaking of himself, or is this the Messiah who's speaking? And I think we can see pretty clearly that it's the Messiah, and we'll confirm this because Jesus applied these verses to himself in Luke chapter 4. So, if it's the Redeemer, then he is anointed by God for a ministry of some kind. And he has a, quote, gospel, or a message of good news to bring to the people. And I think the word liberty is key. It is the same technical word used to speak of the year of Jubilee, that 50th year where all the slaves were freed and everybody's land returns back to the family. All debts are forgiven. All land returned to the original owners. That's what liberty, this word was used in that context as well. And so I think that he's talking about liberty to captives and freedom to prisoners. I think all of these things seem to have a very literal connotation to them. So I think there's this real earthy sense of liberty, freeing slaves, encouraging those who have lost all hope for a better life. So I think the narrator here is indeed the Redeemer, the Messiah. And so one of the things that I wanted to talk about tonight is on this little handout. Because what we're looking at here is a quote that this section is quoted by Jesus in Luke 4:18. So I want to look at this because I think it's very interesting and it's sort of telling. There's a lot of things that you can glean by looking at the comparisons here. So I originally let's read what he said in Luke 4:18. This is, just to lay this setting up for you, this is the beginning of Christ's ministry. And he came to his hometown, and he was speaking in the synagogue, and he sat down in the midst of the Jews, and somebody brought him a book to read, the book of the scriptures to read from, as is the habit of the gathering of those in the synagogue. Part of their purpose of being there is of the scriptures. And Christ takes the book and he opens it up to Isaiah 61. And this is what he says. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim release to the captives, and recovery of sight to the blind, to set free those who are oppressed, to proclaim the favorable day of the Lord. Now, when I first looked at this and compared it to what our Bibles have to say about Isaiah 61, I noticed that there was a section of that is completely left out, which is on the right-hand side, the part in black, to heal the brokenhearted. Jesus specifically skipped over that language. And I got to thinking, well, wait a minute. Jesus was reading from the Septuagint in that setting. And back to look at the Septuagint, and that's what you have here. Septuagint, the English translation of the Greek Septuagint, which I believe was what Jesus was reading from. And sure enough, there was very little, if any, between that and the Masoretic that our translation is based upon. He out the words to heal the brokenhearted. He would have had to just intentionally skip over that. So he said, because he has anointed me to preach good tidings to the poor, he has sent me to proclaim liberty to the captives. Okay? And so, it's the question, why would he do that? The other thing that I've always thought was very telling about this is where he stopped Isaiah. He stopped in mid-sentence, almost mid-verse at least. He says here, to proclaim the acceptable year of the Lord, but they did not say, and the day of vengeance of our God.
Instead, at that point, he sits down to teach.
At that point, he sat down, and they were all interested in what he had to say, and he said, today, this scripture has been fulfilled in your hearing. They all were very interested in the beginning. Before long, they're going to be trying to toss a cliff in about 10 minutes, because he goes on to describe some things that he understands that these people are going to want to hear miracles, like, or want him to perform some miracles like they had him perform in Capernaum. And that's when he went into the conversation about how a prophet is never honored in his own hometown. And at the time of Elijah, there were many who were dire need during the famine, but one received the blessing from Elijah, was in Sidon. And then in Elijah, he goes on to talk about how lepers. It was about, there was only healed from leprosy. Yeah, and the rest of it, people were leprous, and they were healed. And so they got angry over all of this business. And they, from happiness and really curious to hear more from him, wanted to throw him off a cliff. Because he said this. And so, the question remains, why did he omit to heal the brokenhearted?
Because that's the future yet.
I think so. And why did he omit, and the day of the vengeance of God?
I think that one's obvious.
That one's obvious.
The kingdom of heaven is at hand. They repent, but the day of the judgment, or the day of vengeance, the time of Jacob's troubles, trying to say, is not at hand.
Yeah. It's as though, well, one of the things that out at you when you examine the scenario here is how the Old Testament doesn't really sort through the first and second comings of Christ in the way they describe the Messiah. It's all intertwined with one another. Well, this is a point, but I think that Jesus, there was something up here. Because, in a sense, he omitted those things in his perspective. That wasn't what ministry was going to be here. But I do agree it had to be a genuine offer. It was a genuine offer, and there's other reasons for that.
You know, another
But-
thing about to heal the broken heart, Jesus said he came to set father against son, daughter against mother.
Well,
So, yeah.
Yeah, I think he was going to be a very controversial person. There's going to be vision, set up. That's true. And the healing of the hearted, I think, really is.
Doesn't relate to the healing nations in the future too.
Yeah. It's not until the second coming that you have the of all the tears, where there's nothing but, and the sorrows will be passed by you. It's not his first coming, is it?
God's still collecting our tears.
Well, there's, where he does things, but he kind of doesn't want to be revealed or made a big deal about, because certain times just haven't come for that,
Yeah. Yeah. It's
And I think isn't it that he said that the prophets were looking at these things, trying to figure out what was going to come. So Isaiah didn't really on all what was going to be when. You only see the mountains right next to each other instead of valleys in between.
they didn't have that certain level of understanding we have today. Well, let's look at 4 through 9. Then they will rebuild the ancient ruins. They will rise up the former devastation. They will repair the ruins, the desolations many generations. Strangers will stand in past flocks, and foreigners, your farmers and your oppressors. But you will be called the priests of the Lord. You will be spoken of as ministers of God. You will eat the wealth of the nation, and in their riches you will boast. Instead of your you will have a double portion, and instead of humiliation, they will for joy over their portion. Therefore, possess a double portion of their land. Everlasting will be theirs. I, the Lord, says, I hate robbery and the burnt offering, and I will faithfully give their recompense and make an everlasting covenant with them. Then their offspring will be known among the nations, and their descendants in the midst of the people. All who see will recognize them, because they are offspring whom the Lord has blessed. Some good news. Israel and Jerusalem will be rebuilt. Look at the position that God is establishing for Israel in verse 6. They were called priests of the Lord, of God. It seemed to be, or perhaps not really neat in the area of mundane life, gardening, doing the laundry, shopping at the store or harvesting, whatever those are going to be done by foreigners. So like they're going to have Gentile servants in the millennial kingdom, because they're being priests, ministers verse seems as that whatever these lost or forfeited to the around, God is to it that they receive twice as much as what was lost. Not double in size, but value and productivity. And then there's going to be everlasting joy. In verse, this love of justice, a recurring theme. Here God declares his love, justice. And this is working in evidence of righteousness. And so, language about, let's look at 10 through. I will rejoice in the Lord, my soul exult in my, for he has clothed me with garments of salvation. He has wrapped me with a robe of righteousness, as a bridegroom himself with a garland, and as a bride adorns herself with her jewel. For as the brings forth its sprouts, and as the garden causes the sown in it to sprout, so the Lord will cause righteousness and praise to spring up before the nations. I think the narrator in these verses is the individual Israelite. He has the garment of salvation, a robe of righteousness. Here again, we must appreciate the blessing that we Gentiles are experiencing in this church. We do have the spiritual component of the new covenant. And about this quite a bit in the last year. I spoke in the church about how blessed we are as members of the church. Really, it's a work of God, and have a really good role to play in the millennial kingdom too. Have the physical blessing that Israel will have for the new covenant. And in the millennial, God nurtures righteousness across the globe. It's going to be spiritual as well, a physical kingdom. Thing that our series may with us, it's just a physical kingdom. It's dominant righteousness. So let's look 66, 160. Put 63 in 63. I'm 62. It's not right. Anyway, let's look at 1 through 5. For Zion's sake, not keep silent, and for Jerusalem will not keep quiet. Tell her righteousness forth like brightness, her salvation like a torch that is burning. The nations will see your righteousness, and all things your glory, and you will be called by a new name, which the mouth of God will designate. You will also have a crown of beauty in the hand of the Lord, and a royal diadem in the hand of God. It will no longer be you, for nor land will any longer be desolate. For you were called, my delight is in her, and your land married. For the Lord delights, and to him your land will be married. A young man a virgin, so your sons will be you. As the bridegroom is over the bride, so your will is over you. So here are many reasons, statements, extreme statements that God made about the future kingdom. To have some justice, some righteousness in places, some places more than others, but not what you're going to see in the millennial kingdom going to be iniquitous. Not like church has never produced the righteousness of this earth that is spoken of in scriptures. I know that millennials, that we were going to have progressively church age as we went on, contrary to, but nevertheless, the concept, ultimately, church would rule on earth flawlessly, but we would subdue the entirety of the earth to Christ. That was the concept of post-millennial. World War I came, sort of had to work on that. But, and then the evil thing, evangelical, just, the church is in a weakened state of being, conquering this. We're kidding here. So, we're going to hold our, we're going to do what we have to do as far as the state of our territory as church ages. Look at talking about in the kingdom age, and Jerusalem will be the head of all the blues. We read that it's going to be called the name which the Lord will designate. And a lot about names or the people by in order to get an idea of what it's really like, what essence is really about. So there's a whole is going to be revealed with a new name. And a new name or disclosed in Scripture, unless you have anything to say about that. I think there is.
Isn't there in Revelation? We will get new too.
Yeah, and then there's of the conquering Christ back with a name, him that you can understand. There's a lot to names in the Revelation, and I make of it all really. You know, God does rejoice in the church. I don't want to be too harsh in the sense we lost people in particular era, but we really haven't lived through our calling. So the 6 through 9. It says here, on also Jerusalem I have appointed all day and all night they never keep silent. You who remember or take no for yourselves, give him no shall he establish, and Jerusalem praise in the it has sworn by the right hand and by the strong arm, I will never again give you rain, food for your enemies, nor will foreigners your new one for which you have labored. Those who garner it will praise for those who gather it will drink. It is the courts of my sanctuary. So you have the idea of Israel, the recipient of reverence, respect. This is Jerusalem's future. And never again will the produce of the land be turned over to anybody other than the person who it. The work of the harvest is who benefit. There will be economic fairness. No one will be able to take advantage of the system rightfully not earn or produce. Let's finish with verses 12 here. We'll go through the way for the build highway, remove stones, lift up the peoples. Behold, the Lord proclaimed the end of the earth. Say to the Zion, oh, your salvation comes. Be his reward in him, his recompense for him. And they call them holy people. The redeemed of the Lord will be called the forsaken. These verses fitting in, I think, to the chapter. It will one day be completely restored, only to her full glory, as days of Solomon. There will be as a shining on a hill, the magnificence of God, the glory of God, the goodness of God, the righteousness of God, the goodness of God is going to be embodied in Israel, and that will reflect the very character of the Lord and Savior, as well most blessed Trinity, for they are the holy people. Sought out or after, want to seek for Israel. So, for Israel's faith will never on them. All 12 participate as a time, and we'll see this in the 4 chapters with all of these language just yet. So there is the picture of Israel and the world in light of Israel, well, I would say.